Namaste and welcome to Indian History and Archaeology with me, Dr. Lajwanti Shahani. In our last video, we had an interview with Dr. Sunil Gupta in the Archaeotalks section, where he talked about his long career with the Allahabad Museum, from where he retired recently as the former director of the museum. He has enjoyed a parallel career in archaeology, in particular Indian Ocean archaeology. And as we promised to you, today we bring you his presentation on Indian Ocean archaeology. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this very much. If you've missed out on the interview, I will put a link up here, but at the end of this presentation, because I don't want you to miss this one, of course you can at the end of this presentation go watch the interview as well, and you'll get to learn a lot more about him and all the possibilities and probabilities in archaeology as a career. So sit back with a tub of popcorn if you like and enjoy this presentation.
I am privileged to have been invited by Dr. Sani, my old colleague and friend from the Deccan College, for this illustrated talk on archaeology of the Indian Ocean world. Now, friends, before I actually move on to the slides, I would like to give you a small introduction to how I came upon this topic. My PhD theme was on the archaeology of ancient sea trade between Roman Egypt and Peninsular India. That was in '98 from the Deccan College. And the whole idea behind my PhD thesis was not to just look at the very well-researched theme of what we call Indo-Roman sea trade, not in just of looking at the evidence in India and evidence in Egypt, where the two termini of the trade, so to speak, through the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea, but to look at the entire process and entire route, entire passage, and not only the history of it, the archaeology of it. So that led me to the interim points of the trade route between Egypt and India, which is the Persian Gulf, parts of the Oman coast, South Arabia, Somalia, East Africa, and on the eastern side, the Bay of Bengal. And so in the process of my PhD theme, which itself was in a way quite broad, though the time period was from 1st century BC to the 3rd century AD, that would be, of course, the core period of my lecture today also. But in terms of the spatial outreach, it covered a large part of the Indian Ocean, especially the western part of the Indian Ocean. So this, of course, led to widening of horizons in my postdoctoral period, and you can say that I began to gravitate towards a larger framework because while researching the archaeology of Indo-Roman sea trade, I engaged with material which was beyond the Indo-Roman framework, beyond Indian potteries and the Roman amphoras, a lot of trade potteries from the Persian Gulf, Arabia, or Southeast Asia. And I realized that, the ancient past of the Indian Ocean, especially the exchange networks, were far more complex than what could be narrated archaeologically and historically on the subject of Indo-Roman sea trade. But then I would emphasize one point right at the beginning, and this I have articulated in many of my research papers and some of the conceptual themes that I'm engaged in, that you know, the event, the episode of the Roman, trade from Egypt, a political decision for the Romans to start the trade, to open the sea route, when the land route, especially in the region of Iraq and Iran, the ancient Parthian region, was, quite disturbed. There were wars, the Roman Parthian wars. When Augustus Caesar, invades Egypt and he opens the sea route to India, so the spatial part of the Indo-Roman reach, the Roman reach and the Indian response, by itself, offers a template for building on this template a larger, picture of the Indian Ocean. So I don't, in my opinion, the Roman trigger, which led to a kind of globalization of the Indian Ocean world, is a very critical part of studying the Indian Ocean as a whole. So you can say from the Indo-Roman to the Indian Ocean would be more the motto of my lecture today. So we will, in fact, take a journey from the route of this trade, from the shores of Egypt, and we will go down the Red Sea, across the Gulf of Aden, across the Arabian Sea, and then we will move, into the Bay of Bengal and into the Eastern Indian Ocean as we build the story. And in this narrative, I will, of course, try to give you a flavor of the Indian Ocean world. So let us move on. So the Indian Ocean interaction sphere, of course, this is not a complete map which shows more the Eastern Indian Ocean than the Western, but I am sure that you can imagine the rest. And, we'll come back to this. So we go to the beginning of the journey as articulated mainly in the Periplus. As you know, this is the Bible for a lot of us who are studying Indo-Roman trade in Indian Ocean. This Greek Sea Guide, written by an anonymous Greek sailor in the 1st century AD, the Periplus Maris Erythrae, or the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which describes in dramatic detail the journey from Roman Egypt to India. And, today, the excavations in the last 20 years have unearthed many of the port sites mentioned in the Periplus. So we will be following the Periplus a lot, especially as we begin from the Red Sea. And you can see on the top left the ports of Berenike and Qusayr al-Qadim on the Egyptian coast. These are very important Roman period port site, though Berenike begins earlier in the Ptolemaic period in the 3rd century BC. But these two ports are seen archaeologically. The evidence shows them to be, flourishing in the 1st to 3rd century AD, especially the 1st, 2nd century AD. And the evidence is overwhelming in terms of not only the Roman material found, but also a lot of Indian material, as I will show. And of course, a material from the Persian Gulf, from Ethiopia, from South Arabia, and other parts of the Indian Ocean. So this was the trade which is described in the Periplus, archaeologically reflected. You would just reflect on this map a bit and look below to the southern part where you can see Adulis, which was the port of trade to the Aksumite kingdom, which is in the highlands inland. Please remember this location as well as we move down, because it was Adulis and the Aksumite kingdom, which was also a great trading partner with India. And the Periplus, lists the items like Indian iron and steel and cloth and grain, which was imported into Adulis, into the Aksumite kingdom. So you can see here, this is courtesy Professor Stephen Sidebottom, the kind of beautiful Roman glassware found at the port of Berenike on the Egyptian coast. On the top left, you can see the brownish or orange-brown piece is with the vertical sort of moldings, which is a pillar molded uh, molded pillar molded bowl, which is typical of the Roman exports of glassware to the Indian Ocean lands like South Arabia, Persian Gulf, and India. And this is again an amazing find from Berenike, where it is a piece of a Italian Roman amphora, but surprisingly, it is inscribed in Tamil Brahmi. So there was an expatriate Indian merchant or sailor resident on the Egyptian Red Sea coast who owned an Italian amphora, and he inscribed it in his own language. So these are again, slides which have been contributed by Professor Stephen Sidebotham. And you can see on the left side are beads, which are very typically, number of them you will find from Indian early historic contexts. And, bottom right, you can see, the Indo-Pacific beads, as well as the red carnelian bead. These are also typical of the Indian early historic period, 1st to 3rd century, especially, we will come to that port sites of Pattanam and Arikamedu in South India, which were trading with Roman Egypt. And this is something which I'd like to show you, which is a recent find. And I told you about Adulis to, remember the location of it. And as I said that the Periplus describes this port and the Indian goods of trade, which were sort of, entering Aksumite territory, a lot of which has been lost. There had been finds of gold Kushan coins, which are not now anymore. But if you read the reports from Aksum, a lot of the material, especially the beads and the iron implements, I think that, some of you can actually, do deeper research. A lot of that needs identification. And I suspect a lot of that was, basically, imports from India. But this piece is Indian terracotta. The hairstyle is typically, one which we have in the 5th century AD of the Gupta period. This is a unique piece found by the Italian team which excavated in Adulis a few years ago. And so we transit the Red Sea and we come to the Gulf of Aden. This is also a very critical part of the journey to India. And you can see on the upper side along the coast of Yemen, and as we move up to Oman, you can see the two ports over here, which I will show pictures of. Kana in Yemen, and slightly as you go along the coast northwards, there is Khorrori or Moshka Liman of the Periplus. And on the Somaliland coast, on the southern part of the Gulf, you can see a series of ports: Avalites, Malau, Mundus, Mosallam, Spice Port, Cape of Spices, Tabai, Opone. Now these known as the far side ports in the Periplus, and some of them have been discovered. And in between, you can see the island of Socotra. This is also important because a decade ago, a dramatic discovery was made in Socotra in the cave of Hawk. 2 kilometers within this limestone caves, they discovered more than 200 Indian Brahmi inscriptions from 2nd to 5th century AD of sea captains, merchants, Buddhist mendicants, and this fits in very well with the references in the Periplus that Socotra, which was derived from the Sanskrit Sukhadeep or the Happy Isles, was a major halting point for Indian traders from Western India. So this is, as you say, very critical part of the ancient Indian Ocean networks, and this was a map which you need to sort of look at carefully. So we will see some of the pictures from here, and this is the port of Kana. Again, my friend Professor Stephen Sidebottom has contributed this slide, one of his early journeys to the port of Kana in Yemen before, the war has taken over access. And this is a beautiful port where the ships berthed. In the lower city, you can see the North Bay on top, and below you can see these are foundations of large, storage areas where probably was used to store frankincense, which was the aromatic resin, which was a major export from Kana to the Roman world and even to India. And this is some of the red polish ware from Yemen, from port of Kana actually. Some of it could be terra sigillata, which I had the chance to, handle and observe years ago. And again, to show you the map and to look at Moshka Liman, Khor Rori on the Oman coast. And yeah, so this is from the island of Socotra, which I told you. And you can see one of the ship graffiti made in the ancient cave wall. And of course, on the left is a tablet, which is inscription in Pamarine. Now, Pamarine will come to Palmyra, which was a city in the middle of the Syrian desert, but it was coordinating or facilitating a parallel sea route that of Roman Egypt to India. This was the route from Eastern Mediterranean down to the Persian Gulf, and we'll come to that. And now this is Khor Rori, the ancient Moshka Liman of Periplus. This is a very dramatic harbor of antiquity. This is a photograph which has been contributed by Professor Avazzini of the University of Pisa. It has been taken from the air, possibly because you can see the layout of the port in the foreground. On the edge of the creek, you can see the dark area, and you can visibly see the structures. This is the port of Khor Rori, or Sumuram in the local language, along the freshwater creek of Khor Rori, which is flowing into the Arabian Sea. You can see the two natural rock formations forming that breakwater. So there could not have been a more beautiful location. And again, this port of Moshka Liman or Sumuram, as the inscriptions say on the walls there, was actually created by the Hadrami king, who sent military officers from his capital of Shabwa to open up this coast for, again, export of mainly frankincense. A lot of Indian pottery has been found here, a lot of Roman amphora, as well as pottery from Persian Gulf, Arabia, and other parts of the Indian Ocean. So this is very important. And you can see in my visit to Khor Rori, a closer look at the harbor remains, again the storage areas, and you can see the creek and the breakwater and the Arabian Sea from the side of Oman. And this is again the structures, very much like Kana. And you can see the hills at the back. These are the hills where the frankincense trees grow, and the monsoonal climate is suitable enough for some of the best frankincense of South Arabia to have been brought from these hills to Khor Rori for export. And this is actually a frankincense tree. You can see this is part of the Harbor Museum complex in southern Oman, and they have preserved the port very well. And this is the tree where its bark was cut, and the white resin which came out solidifies to make frankincense. So now, of course, this I'll show you some of the later period ports in Oman. These are fortifications of Al-Balid, not far from Khor Rori, but this is dated to the 10th century AD, a huge site stretching for acres upon acres, an open museum. You can see the golf cart over there for taking tourists around. And this has yielded tons of Indian pottery. This was probably the place from where, horses, Arabian horses, were exported to, western coast of India, places like Ghodaghar in Maharashtra, which, as you know, is named after the, was made to receive the horses. So this is again a pretty important and fascinating part of the Indian Ocean archaeology. And now we again come back to the map of Gulf of Aden, and you can see Khor Rori up there. And now we go down a bit the East African coast, right? So this needs to be discussed as we discuss that is a very important part of the Indian Ocean world. And you can see a number of sites. I'm not going to go into detail in any of these, but uh, as far as the Periplus is concerned in the early centuries AD, somewhere in Dar es Salaam, which you can see there in the Rufiji Delta, was probably the last port called Rafta, mentioned in the Periplus, which was possibly located here. My friend, Professor Felix Chami from the University of Dar es Salaam, is spending many years actually looking for the lost port of Rafta. And this is the island of Zanzibar, which I had the occasion to join the Dar es Salaam team in excavations at Unguja. Unguja Uku is, of course, a site on the beach, but this is the Kumbi cave in Jambiani in Zanzibar, which a lot of limestone caves where I could join the team for excavations. And this is the excavations going on in the Kumbi cave in 2005. And, of course, this is dated a little earlier than our period, but it's pretty fascinating. And this is Unguja Uku, the site right on the Zanzibar coast. And this was excavated. You can't see the deposits. They're facing the beach. But it is from here that a couple of red shirts are found, which were possibly of Indian origin and which give credence to the references in the Dashakumar Charit to Indian sailing to Zanzibar. And this is the red polished way on the right side from Zanzibar, and the left is from Yemen. And these are early historic glass beads from Tanzania, and you can see how similar they are to early historic beads from South India. So this is some of the recent finds, and I think even though the finds are very small, but the archaeology of that coast is opening up. And so we have widened the picture, and now you can see the East African coast, the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden that we've crossed. Now we will go a bit up to the Persian Gulf. As I told you, that the Persian Gulf was the alternate route or the parallel route from India and Indian Ocean to the Roman world, to the Mediterranean. And again, as I said, we would not have time to go into such detail of the Persian Gulf routes, but to show you some material from there. These are 5th century AD painted wares of Gulf origin, but they have been found from the site of Cambridge near Surat, which I had the opportunity to excavate in 2002. So these are very important finds from Cambridge, the site which has been identified with site of Kamoni of the Periplus. And these are from the Persian Gulf, typically. So these are what we have here. And these were identified by, Anjana Reddy, Dr. Anjana Reddy, who did her PhD from the Deccan College. And this is fascinating. So this is found probably at the site of Dibba on the United Arab Emirates at the mouth of the Gulf. This is a piece of Roman amphora, but it is inscribed in the South Arabian script, which indicates that there was contact with the Gulf of Aden and the Persian Gulf. So this is contributed, by my friend Yusuf from the UAE, from Sharjah Antiquities. And again, these are glazed ware from the Gulf, which are again excavated at Kamrej in Western India. We'll come to the site, but I'm showing you beforehand to show that these are dated probably to the 4th, 5th century AD, and how, there was this regular contact between Western India and the Gulf. And we come to, the area of Western India slowly. There is, of course, the port of Barbaricon on Pakistan, Sindh, we can see that. Then we can see the ports around the Gulf of Kutch, Dwarka, and ones named in the Periplus, some of them Prabhas Patan, Vallabhi, and Nagara, which are not named in the Periplus, but excavated. But important thing is Barigaza or Brigu Kutch, ancient on the Narmada. And below that, on the Tapti, you can see the location of Kamrej, which I have identified with the ancient village of Kamoni. And these are two riverine ports, 30 or 40 kilometers upstream of the Gulf of Khambat, which is very, very ferocious. You just cannot have any port right at the edge, which you will see. And this is, of course, briefly the Harappan site at Dholavira to just give you a background, and Lothal to show that Western India and Gujarat in particular, the maritime traditions were going deeper. And now, just remember this map, Bharuch, Kamrej talked about, but as we go down towards Mumbai and below Mumbai, then the estuarine, riverine ports give way to creek-based ports where the seawater actually comes in about 20 kilometers at Chaul, at Janjira, and then we go down to the Karnataka coast at Haigunda, Udyavara on this side. So this is the Gulf of Khambat, and you can see that this is very, very rough. You cannot have the ports at the edge, the estuary of the river Narmada. But inside, along the Narmada, it is quite what the periplus called, deep pockets where the ships lay at anchor. And this is, the edge of the Narmada. And this is a mound formation in Bharuch city. The middle part where you can see is what we identified as early historic. And this would have been, part of the settlements of ancient Bhrigu Kutch or Barigaza. And then this is the site of Kamrej that we were talking about, the potteries that we excavated from here. This is an amazing site on the Tapti, again, about 30 kilometers upstream on the river. This was definitely an ancient port, as we found in our limited excavations, a huge amount of iron slag, iron furnaces, about 1.5 kilos of burnt rice from kin areas which were making large storage jars for export, and possibly the remains of a thick brick loading platform, which seemed to have jutted into the river. So this is the place which the periplus probably, and yes, in this context, we identified, it was identified, Dr. Robert Tomber of the British Museum, a piece of Axumite pottery. So this is a dramatic archaeological corroboration of what the periplus is saying, because this is the place from which possibly Indian iron and steel was imported, was exported into Adulis. So you can see this is the cliff mound, the layout of Kamrej. This is one of the, it's a very interesting site. Actually, it looks more like a Jal Durg. The corner seems to be like bastions, and you can see the sheer high walls it was all basically, mud, but what we suspect is that they made it a kind of fortification. And you can see behind that kind of fortified, structure in the river, this is the inside part, and you can see the activity brick platform, thick brick platform where, the archaeologist is standing, and the, sections going up still further. So between the 1st to the 5th century AD, we saw quick rebuilding and intense activity at this point, and definitely a 7, course brick structure, which is jutting towards the Narmada Tapti, was most likely a loading and unloading platform for, ships. And you can see close up the packing and the material and the stratigraphy, which will not dwell here for too long. And the ceramic signatures from Kamrej. On the top right, you can see is the Axumite pottery that we identified. On top left is the kind of, lamp cum jar, storage jar lid, which is again a diagnostic now indicator, which you can see this right up to the Persian Gulf and, in Yemen, and right up to the Egyptian coast. And on the bottom right is the typical cooking jars, again found on the Egyptian coast. And bottom left is a glazed pottery from the Persian Gulf, all from Kamrej. We can see again the map of the Western Indian Ocean. And right, so this is again to tell you that these are, is a slide contributed by Professor Stephen Sidebotham. And this is amazing. You can see the Satavahan coin of mid-2nd century AD, and below is the Kshatrap dynasty coin of the 5th century AD of Rudrasena III. Both of these coins have been found from, the Egyptian Red Sea coast at the site of Berenike. So this brings home so dramatically the close, interaction which was taking place, between in the Western Indian Ocean, especially between, India and the Egyptian coast. So we've shown you the coins, we've shown you the potteries, we've shown you amphorae with, Tamil graffiti there. So there could not be a greater example of globalization, that what we see over here. And these are, fragments of Roman amphorae and Roman pottery found from the heart of Western India in the site of Nevasa, which was excavated, by the Deccan College. It's a very, very important report that which all the students should read. This is an amazing report which has come out from Deccan College, and all the the specifications of this material is there. And these are on the left are the beautiful red polish ware pieces which seem to imitate, or be inspired by Roman red wares, which are found from Nevasa. On the right are, slightly less, of quality, more the orange, it is found from the Gangetic Valley, in North India. And these are again from Nevasa, and you can see that possibly local artists were making this beautiful red wares in the style of what we call, the red polish ware. And they seem to have been attempting to imitate, Hellenistic pottery or, Roman wares. You can see the one on the top left has those typical Hellenistic rosettes, put on them. So this is a fascinating example of what I call hybrid pottery or syncretic wares, which were emerging as a result of the interaction of the two cultures, the Western and Indian, as part of Indian Ocean trade. And now we come to Elephanta Island near Mumbai. This was a center of trade in a period slightly later than the 1st to 3rd century AD. Here is, an international port of trade in what we call the late Roman period, which is the 6th, 5th to 7th century AD. And this is approach to the island of Elephanta, which many of you must have seen. And this is the Red Sea amphora fragment from Elephanta. As you know that a lot of late Roman pottery, is found on the island of Elephanta. I suspect that it is, coming from within the island itself, from deposits which are yet to be located. And, there is a lot of pottery, amazingly, high, of late Roman amphora as well as Persian Gulf pottery, like this glazeware, which is found on Elephanta. And this is the Western map of Western India. And you can see many of the inland sites like Bhokardhan, Paitan, Ter, Nevasa on more towards the coast. And many of the excavation reports of these sites are there in the Deccan College Library. I think students who would like to look at the early historic stratigraphy can have a look at these, reports. And this is, of course, the entrance to the cave of Bhaja, which is dated to the 2nd, 1st century BC. And I'm showing this because from the Deccan Highlands, the routes came down to the coast, to near Mumbai, even if Elephanta is later, but you had earlier ports like Kalyan, which was Kalina of the Periplus, and Sopara. So Bhaja lies on the trade route from, the Deccan Plateau to the Konkan coastlands, and so does the cave of Karla. And you can see this is a shot from within the monastic cell of the Karla cave at the valley below, which overlook the trade routes, passing to the Konkan coast. And then as we go down the coast below Mumbai, you come to creeks such as the Janjira Creek. The island of Janjira is at the mouth, but at the head of the creek where it ends, right over here, you can see the shot has been taken from the early historic Buddhist rock cut sanctuary at Kuda. And this early historic rock cut cave, Buddhist cave, right overlooking the sea, is full of inscriptions of the Mandavs, who were a local dynasty. There is also an donative inscription of a princess, Mandavi, and the inscriptions, donating inscriptions by caravan leaders. And so the village below is known as, it has still a name which is very close to Mandav. And this possibly was the Mandagora of the Periplus, the port. And you can see these are the rock-cut Buddhist caves of Kuda overlooking this creek. This is a stupa carved into the caves. And these are very beautiful. And we move on swiftly to a coast below Maharashtra, which is the Kanara coast or the Karnataka coast. Now, the fascinating thing about the Kanara is that it almost vanishes from history just because Ptolemy, in his Geographia, writing in the 2nd century AD, dismisses almost 300 kilometers of very rich coastlines and harbors as the pirate coast. He called it Pirate Town Sand Dunes. So what happens is that historians who are writing after Ptolemy, even in modern times, simply just accept his reference at face value, and they hardly mention the role of the Kanara, effectively blanking it out from history. But I carried out with my colleague, Dr. Shiva Aruni, my old friend, an exploration of the Kanara coast in around 2000 or 2001. And you can see that this is the Haigunda Island on the river Sharavati as it flows. And this was one of the outposts. And this is a huge, more than life-size Yaksha figure dated to the 5th century AD in a sacred grove still in Haigunda. And this has been researched upon. And the art historians are of the opinion that it has, typical features not only of the Gupta art, but also, of Gandhar and, Hellenistic, influences. So what we are seeing here is again a sort of cross-cultural, creation, which obviously, means that there was trading activity, in Haigunda in the 3rd, 4th century AD. And you can see some of the Buddhist sculptures on the island. And then we go down. Of course, I am, right now not able to show you pictures from Pattanam, which is one of the greatest, excavation stories that we have now on the Kerala coast, excavated for several years by Professor Cherian. And, we have got dramatic discoveries of amphora and beads and many other things which rival Arikamedu on the coast of the Bay of Bengal. So now these are Buddha heads from Lakshadweep, which are made of coral, again, part of the Indian Ocean heritage. And now we cross over to the Bay of Bengal side. And this is the famous site of Arikamedu. And this photograph was taken way back in 1989. But when it was, right now it's covered with a lot of shrub, but you can see the river Aryankupam, and the grassy bank that you see is actually part of the deposits, which was excavated by Mortimer Wheeler, and then by, Casal, and then of course by Professor Begley, Sidebottom, and others later on. And this is some of the finds from Arikamedu. On the top left, you can see these are magnified, of course, and this is a crystal, cameo blank. And a lot of these cameo blanks have been made in Arikamedu, and this seems to be a discard because it seems to have been sort of, little bit damaged at one corner. And below are glass, imitations on the left of green beryl and, red agate. So this is fascinating. Again, these are Indo-Pacific beads from Arikamedu. Now, these Indo-Pacific beads, as you know, are the diagnostic indicators of trade all across the Indian Ocean. They have been found right from 5th century BC to almost the modern age. And right now, the imitations of these beads are made in plastic and they are well sold. And the one at Arikamedu is from the workshop there. And these are specially diagnostic indicators of trade in the Eastern Indian Ocean. Now, when we shift now slowly to the Eastern Indian Ocean area, the diagnostic indicators more than pottery are beads, glass beads and stone beads. So this is again colored glass from Arikamedu, and you can see some of it is made there, and some of the one in the middle top is the red agate, as if glass is imitating stone. And this is the eastern coast along the Bay of Bengal. You can see, the Andhra coast, the Godavari and the Krishna estuaries and the Pennar, and right up, you can see the several rivers of Odisha flowing into the sea. And you can see right at the top, the Gangetic estuary of Lower Bengal. So I'm not going to go into detail of all these sites, but it's necessary to have a look at how the early historic coastal sites are spread along, the eastern coast of India, along the Bay of Bengal, heavy and active with a lot of trade, both with the Western Ocean and the Southeast Asia. And as we go up, this is something which I'd like to talk about, what we known as the Cowrie Trail, which means that you can see the routes going right into the Indian Northeast, through that across Burma into southern China, and up to the Erhai Lake and to Kumen. Now, this is very important because what I'm proposing is that there was also this kind of sea and land route trade, which combined where, Indo-Pacific beads and cowrie shells, the best which were found in Maldives, were taken right up to the Indian Northeast and exchanged with tribes right from the Northeast into southern China in return for forest products, especially Malabathrum or Tejpatta. And, it is important and fascinating that the Periplus records Malabathrum to be the second largest export from Muceris to the Roman Empire after pepper. And it is this same Malabathrum which was brought from the Indian Northeast. And you can see the arrow there on the western coast where Malabathrum is shown getting exported to Roman Empire. And below that are the cowrie beds of Maldives. Some of the best cowries of the Indian Ocean is acquired from Maldivian cowrie beds. So you can imagine a kind of exchange network forming right with Northeast India. And you can see the trade routes going right across, early bead finds into southern China, and some of the sites of Southeast Asia as well. You can see Bandon Tafet, Phuntsne, and Okyo, where the bead trade was going on. These are beads from Bandon Tafet in Thailand, Indian beads dated to the 3rd century BC. And these are carnelian beads from Koshambi in India. And you can see is a comparison of carnelian beads on the left from BDTP in Thailand and Koshambi, India. And you can really see that, they're not different from these carnelians are exactly the same, except for some color difference. And these are, of course, now proven to be Indian carnelian exports to Phuntsne in Cambodia. So you can see, as I was telling you, the huge amount of glass and stone bead trade, which is actually taking over in the eastern part of the Indian Ocean, as compared to the western part where you see more, pottery. And these are early bead finds in Southeast Asia. And some of these beads, stone beads, are coming from the heart of the Gangetic Valley, and they're joining, the trade routes into Southeast Asia and southern China. And this is the rouleted ware from Ambari in Assam Valley, which shows the, that sea, the sea connections of the Assam Valley with possibly Lower Bengal. And this is quite fascinating. This is from my, visit to actually southern China, right in the border with, Burma and not far from India in Yunnan. And this is on the Dali Museum. These are imitation cowries made of clay, like you have, imitation of Roman coins in India. So you can imagine these cowries were so valuable in the, Chinese society, southern China and Yunnan, that, they were imitated in clay as early as the 3rd century BC. And this is the site on the Erhai Lake where these clay imitations have been found. And of course, again, you can see sea routes going deep, in southern China. And these are Indo-Pacific beads now to end the story from as far away as Japan. Now, this was part of my postdoctoral research where I researched these beads, Indo-Pacific beads from probably the Bay of Bengal area of Southeast Asia, parts of India, which were reaching Japan and Korea in large numbers in the first, second century AD through possibly several, exchange networks on the way. And these beads are found in hundreds and thousands in, graves, in Yayoi period graves and Kaya period graves in Korea. And this is the kind of distribution, of heavy distribution you can see of the Indo-Pacific beads in Japan. So we have reached almost to the other part of the world, starting from Roman Egypt, this journey. I hope, you have, sort of enjoyed it. And I hope that I've been able to articulate my points here. What I mean to say is this, that this is really the globalization of the ancient Indian Ocean world at your, right in front of you, because these beads, Indo-Pacific beads, began to impact Japan right at the BC AD transition when the Roman trade was impacting Indian shores. And we know that there was so much of glass exchange, so much of exchange of expertise, and these are all connected right from, Roman Egypt to Japan. The entire Indo-Pacific region is, well connected in terms of the trade which was taking place. So thank you for, giving me a listen. And of course, as I said, that you can see from my very narration, which at the point that I began earlier, that we began with Indo-Roman trade, but I'm sure, I give you a sense that we have moved on to something larger than that. It is a very complex picture, still, which is unraveling. A lot of research, opportunities are here, and I'm sure, students of archaeology who would, like to do a kind of, global research can actually join, the whole, new researches which are going on in Indian Ocean archaeology. And also, not only that, Indian Ocean archaeology, being a kind of global template, offers you, a great scope for theoretical thinking, which means that you're not restricted to national borders. You can think laterally. So you can have a PhD, for instance, of comparing the urbanization in the early first millennium BC of, the Gangetic Valley with that of Yemen, which took place in the same period. So there is a chance of comparative study of civilizations. There is also the theoretical constructions to move into philosophy of history or philosophy of archaeology, which means that you can probably use the archaeology and history of the early Indian Ocean past to, build, to move towards larger, themes of civilization, like, it could be, things like, not only trade, but not only art, but what connected all these in terms of human civilization. So, not only, art schools which sprung up like Gandhar and at Nagarjunikonda and at Hatra and in South Yemen, which also could be a matter of research. So there's a lot that you can do. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. This is really, really very enlightening. And in fact, connecting with the Harappan period, coming down into the early historic and the late historic, and also, of course, into the contemporary period, the Dhau trade, we have an unbroken chain, almost an unbroken chain. There are gaps in between that we haven't yet understood, of course. So there is a lot of work, of course, to be done there.
Right, absolutely. And what you said that, which I really did not, because of the lack of time, go into it. But what you said about the Harappan, and even earlier than that, and if we move forward from 3rd century AD onwards towards the late So there is a need to, what I was saying, to look at deep time, to some of the, expressions which of trade or exchange of goods or many things, especially botanical products which were introduced, which were taking
Yes.
far back in prehistory. So there was a build-up. I'm writing about it, in fact, trying to bring together a small book on that, how this did not just happen in the first century AD. The build-up was taking place through centuries. So I completely agree with you over there that,
Yes.
we can, that
Even
is,
with the Harappan also, when we're looking at the Harappan seafaring, obviously they did not just begin in the mature Harappan period. There has to be a build up to that also. The
absolutely
entire technology for seafaring,
right, right,
shipbuilding, navigation,
right.
everything there as well. Similarly,
Yes,
of course, pottery, ceramics, everything. There
right.
is a long, long history which goes even further back. I mean,
Absolutely,
before the Harappan
absolutely. There was a whole
also there.
complex,
It's, yes,
so
yes, very, very fascinating as well. Thank you so much. We've
right.
really enjoyed
Pleasure.
this, and I'm sure our audience has also enjoyed this, and we look forward to their comments as well, in fact, and hopefully you'll be able to answer their comments in the chat at some point as well.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Sani. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. So please do leave your comments and queries in the section below this video, and we will get back to you, of course, with answers for any of your queries as well. And do let us know that you like this video by clicking on the like button as well. Please subscribe if you haven't yet done so, and hit the bell icon to get notification of any new videos coming as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Namaste.